Copyright 2017. This beautiful kids book is called The Fair Young Maiden and Her Fairy Godparents. Once upon a time, there was a fair young maiden. She lived in a land of hidden magic and undiscovered dreams. One day, the maiden looked into the mirror and she did not recognize anyone or herself. She knew in her heart there must be some magic in this world, even though everyone laughed and everyone around her mocked the idea. They did not believe in magic. One day, her heart was broken after a wonderful man she once loved could no longer be found behind those dazzling blue eyes. He was there in body, but the spark he'd had, the one she'd fallen in love with in the very beginning, had gone out long ago. She tried making things better for the young man, who also tried helping her in his own beautiful ways, but the bond that they once shared had disappeared long ago. Feeling empty inside, they both hung on to something that wasn't really there, and it made them both feel very sad. Finally, she opened her eyes to see what had been staring her in the face all along. The truth. And she knew something had to change, and fast. The young maiden with beautiful strawberry blonde curly hair called out to the skies, asking for help. She didn't know if anyone was listening. She didn't know if anyone could hear her, but she still waited under a dark, snowy sky in hopes that someone would hear her plea. Crying in pain, something unexpected happened, and magical. She heard and then saw a fairy godfather. She'd heard of fairy godmothers before, but this was something truly a rare thing to behold. The fairy godfather explained to the young maiden that it was time. If she wanted her life to change so that she could live happily ever after, she would need to change her life around. It would take a lot of work, patience, and she would need to learn to trust herself and accept herself, as well as learn to love herself. He explained to her heart that if she would be open-minded to getting his help, but also the help of his wife, the fairy godmother, and anyone else that they would place in her path, and if she would study, learn new things, travel to faraway places, where she could learn some of the most wonderful things and learn some of the most important life lessons. And if she could learn to like and love herself, then she would be able to have her happily ever after. Over the next 2 years, the young maiden worked very hard. She studied new languages that had never been heard before, while others had just started to awaken. She began doing everything she could. Everything to pour love into others around her. Everything she could to pour love into herself. She often fell asleep, too tired to move at the end of one of these days. She couldn't move one more muscle, for she'd never worked so hard in her life. Every day, she did everything she could to change the sad, unhappy, and miserable thoughts and stories her mind told her into happy ones, filled with hope and love. She worked on her mind, her emotions, and her body, daily to get them all happier and healthier. She worked to get more in tune with her soul, her beautiful spirit. Sometimes it felt like she was doing all the work for nothing, but in time, she began to notice positive changes in her life. Sometimes it felt like nothing was going to ever budge or change or move. Sometimes it felt like she was doing all the work for nothing. But in time, she began to notice positive changes in her life. She smiled more, laughed more, felt much more peaceful inside her heart, and began to do things that she once had loved so much. No matter how stormy some days got, the fair young maiden started being able to see sunshine in everything and everyone. Even on really bad days, she could even find hope, and that was a truly beautiful gift to have. When there was sadness, she could find or create happiness. When there was anger, she could see joy. And when there was frustration, she began learning to have faith that kept her calm inside. In time, she began, for the first real time in her life, making lots of really close friends. They loved her and welcomed her into their hearts and homes with wide open arms. She was always thankful for every single thing and everyone, both big and small, that was blessing her life. She learned to heal her heart, and while doing so, learned a great deal about herself. She learned that when she trusted herself, that miracles could happen. And she learned that when she made mistakes, everything would be okay. She also learned to be nice to herself and not get so hard on herself when she made those mistakes. She learned to stop worrying and start thinking, trusting in her fairy godparents and the beautiful person she was, and then to take action whenever it was needed. She much preferred this method to worrying. As she lived like this, her faith increased in herself, her fairy godparents, and even once again, humanity. Even though so many people still forgot what magic was, or even refused to believe in it at times in its existence, she began seeing how many people were starting to remember the truth about who they are as wonderful, powerful, and magical beings. She remembered more and more that she was always a loving and caring person, but she just forgot who she was at some point. Somewhere along the way, she listened too much to those who didn't believe in any kind of magic, and because of it, she began to forget how amazing she was. Now, as she worked very hard on herself, learning to trust the still small voice inside of her very own instincts and intuition, she began to remember things she'd long forgotten. It was almost as though the longer that she did what the fairy godfather had spoken of, the longer she opened her heart to new and wonderful things, and the more she learned to embrace this shining star she really was. It was as though the fog was disappearing. She could see more and more clearly until one day something amazing happened. She remembered probably the most important thing she could ever know, aside from loving and accepting herself. As the fairy godfather and the fairy godmother looked down on her smiling great big smiles, the fair young maiden realized that she was never an ordinary maiden. That everyone around her pretending to be regular, ordinary people, they weren't really. But some of them just didn't know yet. Twirling in the greatest happiness she'd ever known, she remembered that she was a princess. Yep, all along she lived her life as an ordinary, person just like everyone else around her. But the truth was that neither she nor anyone else was ever just normal or ordinary. They were all princes and princesses. Yep, we were all extraordinary. Extraordinary. Looking to the skies, she thanked her fairy godfather, who had now revealed his true identity to her. She was ready to know the truth. I suppose there was always a part of her that knew. She just didn't know how to listen for the longest time and trust herself at the time. And now she knew. The fairy godfather and mother were her parents. They were the king and queen. Twirling and dancing even more now, she also began singing a very happy song. She'd never felt so good all her life, for she now knew that no matter what happened in her life, or even if she had bad days, that there was always hope. She knew she could do anything she put her mind to. She knew that she was loved and would always have someone watching over her and helping her. Now she knew who she really was, and she couldn't wait to share it with the whole world. Maybe if they knew, if they could just remember that they are princes and princesses too, maybe they would once again be happy as well. Maybe their happiness would start getting bigger and bigger and growing brighter and brighter until one day it shone so bright that there would no longer be any more sadness or darkness in the world. Hey, one can always hope, right? Lastly, although she wasn't quite sure she knew who her Prince Charming was, or would end up being, she did know something much, much better. She knew something that would always keep her strong, remind her to have fun, be kind and loving to herself and others around her, and something that would help her become queen one day. She now knew who she was. And as much as that might not seem like that big of a deal, to those who've remembered and woken up to who they really are, they know that it is a secret key to happiness. That knowing, accepting, loving, and embracing who you truly are in this life, in light and compassion, is the greatest, most powerful gift that you can ever have. The end. There is no greater or more powerful force in this world than the gift of love. When you learn to love yourself and to accept and embrace yourself completely, and embrace who you really are, there isn't anything that you cannot do in this big, bright, and beautiful world. It might take time. You guys, it might take effort and focus and maybe a little patience. But dreams really do come true. And you really can have your happily ever after. Or, in this case, live happily for forever. All my love, the universe, and Joyanne Serenity.